Thanks a million, everybody, for joining us. My name is Ciarán Nugent. I'm an economist with the Nevin Economic Research Institute, and this is our latest Wednesday seminar. Today, as a guest, we have Albian Krasniqi, who's a PhD researcher and lecturer in TU Dublin. He holds an MSc in economics from the University of Pristina in Kosovo and an MSc in development economics from Sussex. Before pursuing his PhD, Albian served in the Ministry for Finance in Kosovo as an economist and worked as a teaching assistant as well in the University of Pristina. He's also his supervisor is a former legend of the Nevin Economic Research Institute, Rory O'Farrell, who also presents for us on occasion. Just a little bit of housekeeping, just for anybody out there who might be interested in presenting for us. Our annual labour market conference is at the end of May. If you want to look at the NERI website, we're taking pitches if anybody wants to send an abstract in. It's a great day out. It's in Belfast this year. The format today will be a presentation, first of all, from Albian, which will be somewhere in the region of half an hour to 40 minutes. As we go along, if you have any questions, maybe you put them in the Q&A for us, and I'll be able to ask those questions then at the end if you have anything to ask Albian about his presentation. So Albian's going to present on exploring working hours disparities in Europe. Working hours profoundly influence workers' health, work-life balance, financial stability, and well-being. Since the 90s, average working hours have decreased in most European countries, and yet significant differences remain between Eastern and Western Europe, as well as within countries across sectors and occupations. So Albian's study here looks at individual and country level and regional data, applying a multi-level approach and unconditional quantile regressions to explore the determinants of individual working hours, and finds a clear east-west divide. And I won't give it away any further than that, just reading off the abstract there. So Albian, it's 15:35 exactly. So feel free to go to 5, 10 past, maybe quarter past, and then hopefully the crowd, the Luchtvaken here, will have some Q&A for us to keep the conversation going afterwards. So I'll leave it to yourself. And one more thing, please. Just, I know most have it there, but everybody, can you turn off your microphones just so we get a clean recording and clean broadcast. Thanks a million.
Thank you so much for having me today. So it's really a good opportunity for me to share my work with other people who are interested in labor market, and I hope I'm gonna gain some good comments from this discussion so I can improve my research. As the previous speaker mentioned, I am a PhD student and lecturer at TU Dublin, and I work with Rory O'Farrell, who is my supervisor. Today I'm gonna talk about the working hour disparities in European Union. So basically, I'm interested to know how many hours per week usually people work, and what explain the differences between countries, but also within countries. So if you look the map of how many hours per week most of European workers typically work, there is a clear divide between East and West countries, I would say. So most of the East countries and most Western Balkan, including Turkey, tend to work the larger number of working hours per week compared to countries in the West. So besides this cross-country variation in average working hours, they are also within country variation. So if we look at different sectors, like for example, workers of construction sector, you will see that they work more than the national average national average of working hours. Like for instance, construction workers in Ireland typically work around 30% more compared to the national average. On the other side, you have also sectors or occupations which typically work fewer hours compared to the national average, like the occupation, like elementary occupation. So in most of the countries, they tend to work less than national average. But then you have also some mixture, like workers in accommodation and food industry, when in some countries like Greece, Cyprus, and other maybe, let's say, tourist-driven economies, they tend to work more than national average, but we will see also lots of situation typically in the West when they work much fewer hours compared to the national average. So we can say that besides cross-country differences, there are lots of within-country differences in terms of in what sector do you work and what kind of occupation do you have. So the number of working hours is very important for many reasons, and including the workers' health, work-life balance, and overall well-being. So all of these really matter when it comes to how many hours per week do you work. To protect workers from being overexploited by their firms and businesses and corporations, most of the European countries have some, let's say, legislation that cap maximum number of working hours that people can work. On the other side, insufficient labor hours can also pose some financial challenges to people, because obviously they somehow reduce economic certainty and security. So their earnings might be quite impacted if there are only a few working hours per week. As we mentioned, I mean, there is a declining trend in most of European countries, and if you look in the past century, the working hours have been decreasing dramatically in most of the countries in the world. But then after the 1990s, although they continue decreasing, you see, let's say, different trends between countries, when some of the rich countries experience a larger decrease in trend, while the others, of course, they struggled somehow after the 2000s. In this study, we have combined both determinants, both level of determinants of working hours. In other words, how many hours per week it matters. Not only the individual characteristics like age, profession, education, but also in what country are you living. So country level characteristics also matters when it comes to deciding how many hours per week will you work. So that's why we combine micro level data with macro level in order to see the impact on the working hours. Basically, this graph shows that in most of Europe countries, the average working hours has fallen, except Sweden, which is an exception, and it's nice for a case study for other or future research to look what happened with them, since in the last 25 years they have seen an increase in working hours, while in most other countries you can see a decrease. But still, you can see from the graph the east and west divide on average working hours. The literature is quite established in many things, and one of the earliest part look at the trade-off between working hours and employment rates. In other words, literature suggests that there is a trade-off between working hours and employment levels. So the power of union often led firms to adjust working hour rather than just employment level. Why? Because basically and essentially it's very difficult to fire and hire people. So if you have the flexibility of adjusting working hour instead of firing and hiring people, usually firms would just go for the first option instead of the second one. This, on the other side, incentivize also companies to hire more people. Why? Because if one of them is just sick or just don't show up, you will just increase the average working hours to other people, and basically you don't need to lower the overall output of your firm. This practice is in literature known also as a overhiring, and usually can lead to reduce the average salary, because somehow firms gain market power and bargaining power compared to workers. The flexibility, of course, of setting working hours is primary privilege of firms, and this is held especially for low level of educated workers, and also workers associated with sectors and occupations when the payments and salaries are not very high. So studies have shown that regardless of sometimes of education, that some people also experience a larger fluctuation in working hours. So basically, by the beginning of the week, they don't know how many hours they're gonna work during this week, which is really concerning in many cases. Like, for example, other studies show that 1/3 of U.S. employees don't know the exact time of how many hours they're gonna work, and this is especially true for some of the sectors and occupation which are exposed to so-called last-minute shift cancellation, which is quite an issue in many countries of the world. The number of working hours, of course, is influenced also from other important things, like the number of other family members that participate in the labor market. So as the female labor force participation increased within the family, the average working hours worked by other households, typically men, tend to decrease. And this is somehow like a common sense to understand, because the financial burden to provide and take care about the household is distributed to more people, and there is no need that one of the family members gonna work for extensive working hours, but just go for a relaxed one, like a normal or average national ones. Of course, there are also studies showing that household production or unpaid labor is a critical factor influencing the decision to join the labor market. A spouse with higher wage is likely to reduce their participation, because obviously they prioritize labor market engagement instead. However, if you see the literature of the impact of female labor force participation on the working hours, they is somehow scarce compared to other things when it comes to the country level data. So the impact of overall increase in female labor force participation is relatively underdeveloped compared to other topics, and that's why we identify this as one of the main hypotheses of our studies. So we are very interested to see the impact of overall women labor force participation on average working hours. For example, in 1919, the statistics shows that in Ireland, around 55 women were employed per 100 men. But during the last year, I think the ratio became from 55 to around 90. So there is a significant increase in the female labor force participation in Ireland and in most of the Western European countries. The situation, I think, is quite different in some of the Eastern European countries, including Western Balkan countries, which usually have much lower female labor force participation ratio. This graph shows the change in female to male labor force participation ratio in Europe, and we can show that there are lots of changes in the past 23 years. So in most of the countries, there is an increase in ratio. So female employment has been significant in most of the countries, and obviously some of them still lag behind, like Turkey, and you have here some of the Western Balkan countries like Albania, North Macedonia, and a typical exemption from the sample here, or outlier, I would say, is Romania, which saw a reversed trend. So they saw a decrease in female labor force participation in 2023 compared to 2000. So I think it's interesting for someone to go, maybe for a future study, to look what happened with the female labor force participation in Romania, because they have seen something which is unusual for most of the European countries. There is like a central question in literature: why workers in rich countries work fewer hours? And there are two main hypotheses they may explain this phenomenon. The first one is called the income effect, and the second one is linked with taxation and social transfers. So Keynes was one of the first economists and philosophers to discuss about the average working hours, and he predicted that decrease in trend in working hours is somehow attributed to the higher level of income, so higher. And the later hypothesis suggests that rich countries have more generous, I would say, social transfers or social welfare system, and also higher income tax, which somehow might reduce incentives to work longer hours. So if you look like the effective tax rate of personal income tax in most of the Western countries is, the larger bracket is around 40 or 45%, while in many of the Eastern countries it's around a maximum of 20%. So the incentive of working in some extra few hours is not very strong when you think that almost half of your earnings are going to be taxed by the government. And there is a recent study who looks at both of these hypotheses and find that in most of the countries in the sample, I think it's only for Europe, the income effect is dominant compared to other effects. In other words, the country becoming rich is more important in reducing the working hours than other legal and social systems like social transfers and taxes. Of course, then you have also other factors that influence working hours, and technological advancements and progress that we have seen in the last few decades have a good and impact on overall productivity levels. And we will see later that productivity is quite linked with the overall number of working hours that individuals supply. And also, of course, besides technology, economic policies explain a significant variation and the overall condition of the labor market, I would say. So when it really matters if the country is in full employment or it is experiencing somehow significant unemployment levels. A recent study also tried to look countries and to disaggregate countries into individualist or more collectivist societies. So basically, they are trying to argue that if a country is more individualistic, then often workers will typically offer fewer hours compared to the other scenario. This graph basically shows most of the countries in the world, and it is a correlation between productivity expressed as GDP per hour work in PPP terms and annual working hours per worker. So from the graph, we can see like a clear picture that there is a decrease in trend. So as the country becomes more productive, the average number of working hours tend to decrease. And I removed Ireland from the sample because the productivity per hour worked was around more than 100 and something, and it was around here. So it was like making the graph look so ugly, and I didn't know how to adjust. I said maybe I can show this graph without Ireland, but basically Ireland is someone, I mean, over here, because the average working hour, at least weekly, is around 33, so it's slightly more than Norway and other Scandinavian, and some of the Scandinavian, not all of them. But productivity obviously was the highest in the world if we just look at this measure. Other studies looks also the impact of inequality. And some of the authors suggest that inequality in the United States somehow pushes workers to respond to higher marginal income gains. And somehow they just supply more hours because they keep in order to fight from the inequality and let's say secure some financial security, they need to work more. Reflection of wages and income towards a working hour is much more significant at low wage workers or low paid workers. Why? Because, as you know, the backward bending supply curve of labor, you know that at the beginning, so if you are in part of the extreme, either you are earning too much or too less, you know that an additional let's say euro or dollar, whatever, or profit in your wage, you're going to reflect more, either in terms of working more or working less. So if you are in low wage, in this case, having paid more, you can easily be incentivized to supply a few more hours per week. There are also lots of studies looking at the social transfers, like the one in Germany, and they find that fathers cannot afford to reduce working hours without social benefits. So there are lots of countries that typically offer lots of social transfers for family. So fathers are able to balance their work-life balance just because of those social transfers. So without them, they would be forced to work more in order to maintain their financial stability. And also, rate of union coverage, it is found in literature to have quite a significant impact. So how strong the unions are in your country definitely impacts the overall number of working hours that you are working. The last thing I wanted to look in the literature before exploring the data and presenting the analysis is to look the net migration per 1,000 people in Europe. And as in many other data, you can see a clear, I would say, East and West divide. So countries in the East, and typically Western Balkan countries, I would say they face negative migration rate, meaning that more people are leaving the countries than coming to those countries, while those in the West, they typically have more positive migration rate, meaning that more people are coming than leaving those countries. And if you see Ireland, for example, it's over here, it is said that per 1,000 people, they have around a positive number coming around like 8. But the data are only for 2024, so only for last year. So it's interesting because what you see in the labor market dynamics, typical workers would go from, let's say, Greece or Albania or whatever the countries here to the West. So you will see this kind of a shift from one part of Europe to the other one. And interesting to see then how this affects the working hours. And I think we have found some interesting results, especially for the Eastern countries, which the impact of net migration is more significant and is easier observed compared to the Western sample. So just to sum up, we have made like a visualization what we want to do with the study. And I guess the visualization is a bit, the letters are, and the font is a little bit small, but we want to test 5 main hypotheses in this study. And we start by drawing on labor demand adjustment theory, and we want to see if working with more co-workers in the same space. So basically, if you are working with more people in the same firm or same store, same unit, and there is an increase in the workers in that store, is going to reduce the individual working hours. Then we look also in 4 other hypotheses which are linked more in country level data. So we look if the increase in female labor for participation in country level is affecting the individual working hours. Then we look at how is the labor productivity impacting the working hours. We look also the net migration and so all of these hypotheses are used in 2-level regression, so individual level and country level. And we use different explanatory variables, which I will describe later when I describe the data. So basically, the outcome variable of our study is individual average weekly working hours. So as I said, the average working hours are determined by individual characteristics, but also country level characteristics. And given that there is a lot of heterogeneity in our data, so you cannot simply use a mean regressor like or estimation technique like OLS, because obviously you will suffer from violating some of the OLS conditions. So you need to account for heterogeneity by including the country level regression into the analysis. And this analysis this methodology is quite established in literature. So you will find a lot of studies looking in different aspects of the labor market. One more thing to add here. I've tried to make the methodology and then results more engaging with the audience. So I didn't put many tables or equations. So in case you need to know more about you want to see the tables with regressions, and also you want to know more about the methodology, I would just let me know. Just send me an email or something, and I would be happy to discuss and to share with you the regression tables and the techniques that we use. Other things to look is to say here when discussing the methodology is that besides the mean impact, so most of the estimators look at the mean impact of something, so how causally they are related. We also imply some quantile, unconditional quantile techniques. So basically the unconditional quantile makes us to look if the impact is different when we look at the mean and when we look at other part of working hour distribution. So if let's say, for example, migration is impacting differently people on average, and if it is impacting differently those that work part-time, like those that work around 10 to 15 hours. So since there might be like differences in this, it's quite good to have some quantile techniques when discussing. As I already mentioned, there are two main arguments why should be multi-level techniques used, and one of them is because the OLS assumption might be violated in some cases. In terms of the data, we have employed 3 waves of the European Working Conditions Survey. So basically, it's a survey supervised and I think funded also by the Eurofund institution. So in the survey, there are 36 European countries, so EU 27 and Western Balkan countries, Turkey, Switzerland, Norway, and UK, I think United Kingdom before leaving the European Union, something like that. So When it comes to merging data, we have at the individual level. So if it is observed a person from Dublin, let's say, we have an identifier of the region. So Ireland has in total 5 NUTS 2 level or regional divisions. So we can then append macro level data from the threat region. So instead of having, let's say, 36 macro level data, we have around 300, increase in the variation in the data. So this is much more pleasant when you are working, especially with a limited number of macro data, because it introduces a variation in your data, which makes the estimation and the causal impact easier to evaluate. So there are around 300 regional regions in Europe, and we include female to male labor force participation, which is available in regional level. So we know for each region in Ireland how much the female to male labor force participation ratio is. Similarly, we know also the GDP per hours work, which address one important thing, especially for Ireland, because it removes doubling and from other regions, and somehow we are able to control for potential outliers, because obviously Dublin is the region in Ireland who is driving productivity, in terms of overall productivity in the world. And then we use net migration per 100 per 1,000 people. So the data on social benefits as a percentage of GDP and net migration is only available in country level. So we wouldn't able to find any data in regional level, because obviously it's not produced from national statistics agencies. So there are around, in our analysis, we have around 65,000 observations, which are somehow solid. And we use 3 waves of the working condition survey, basically 2005, 2010, and 2015. That is available also 2021, but during that survey, most of the country were conducting the survey during the pandemic, so during the lockdown. And if you see working hours during the lockdown was somehow an outlier, because most of the countries have some problem in reporting working hours, and we decided that maybe we just exclude 2021 from the analysis. Now I'm gonna show the main results of our study, and as I said, I have not shown the tables, but in case you are interested, just let me know, and we are happy to receive comments and to share the table results with you. First, obviously, there are gender differences when we estimate the regression in all Europe countries, so in all 36 countries. Males tend to work around 3.6 hours more than females per hour, so on average. So there is lots of heterogeneity, and we will later divide regressions based on East and West Europe, but I think this coefficient doesn't change too much. Then there is also a family size effect. So larger family size impact working hours for males, so it increases, but it has a different and expected, I would say, impact on females. Then the first hypothesis of our study is that increasing the number of workers within the firm, within the store, basically decreases the overall working hours. So we have found a significant impact to confirm or to support our hypothesis. And the other individual characteristic, important thing to discuss, I would say, is the type of contract that workers have. And having a permanent contract definitely lead to more stable working hours. So people who have permanent contract, and if we look like unconditional quantile, they reveal a very interesting impact. So if you look like only the mean regression, there is no significant impact of permanent contract. And then if you imply quantiles, which are very helpful to look when the cases are more and the relationship is more complex, they show that somehow a permanent contract is helping people to get more hours up to the median, but then after the median, it is protecting people for working in extensive hours. So basically, it has a positive impact up to the median, and then after that, the impact becomes negative. Then if we look at country level variables, we estimate that 10% increase in female to male ratio reduced working hours by around 0.6 per week. So of course, ceteris paribus, holding other factors constant. And if you look then regressions based on gender, you see that males typically tend to benefit more from higher female labor force participation. So their coefficient is much higher, and you see that the reduction on working hours is more significant. It is interesting to see that also the sectors and occupations that benefited more from the female labor force participation are those in retail, manufacturing, accommodation, but we observe no significant impact of those working in public administration or health sectors, meaning that the gender representativeness in these sectors are more equal, I would say, but also these sectors are, the working hours in these sectors, especially in public administration, is regulated by law. So it's not like an impact of an increase in macroeconomic factors would that necessarily impact their working hours. The other thing that it's interesting to look is the impact of productivity. So on average, an increase in productivity is associated with a reduction in working hours. So the correlation between productivity and working hours that we saw for most of the countries, we are able to estimate, and we can see that the causal relationship is significant, and it is reducing the working hours. Then the most interesting part, I would say, is discussing East and West disparities. So in the West, typically third-level educated workers would work more than in the East. On the other side, in the East, usually low-educated workers work more than in the West. Managers work more in the West, while elementary professions or occupations tend to work more in the East. So I would say that there is like a clear division in terms of if you are low paid, low educated, you will work more if you are in the East. But it's the opposite if you are in the West. So in the West, if you are high educated and if you are associated with a sector or occupation that it is well paid, then obviously there is a chance that you're going to be working more. So this graph basically shows it is like the estimated coefficient in 3 regression, the overall regression, West Europe, and East Europe. So there are some significant changes. As I was saying, the most notable one is the service sale workers, when in the West they work less than professionals, while in the East they work more than professionals. Similarly, is also when we look regression based on, coefficient based on sectors, and there is lots of variation on the data, especially some sectors like the fishing or agriculture. You see a strike difference between East and the West, and similar. Another very important thing is the differences in macro level variables on the working hours between East and West regressions. So we are able to look the impact of female labor force participation, as I said previously, since in Western countries, most of the countries has a very high ratio of female to male, then the coefficient becomes insignificant, or it is significant only in 10%. Why? Because there is low variation in the data. Most of the countries have similar ratio of female to male, and they already close to equity, I would say, in labor force participation. On the other side, on the other side, the effect is much stronger in the East because the coefficient doubles, and the impact is similar in terms of productivity and social benefits. So I would say productivity is much stronger in the East compared to the West. And the last interesting thing that I would like to share with you about our result is the impact of net migration. So we have seen in our regression results that in the West Europe, immigration typically reduce working hour, but only those at the median, working around the median. And in the East, on the other side, the unconditional quantile regression show us that immigration it is putting pressure to low-hour workers. So it is making them that are working part-time and supplying lower than average to work more because of the gap. On the other side, for those that are working more than the national average, they are somehow pushing towards the average of the country level. So basically, I would say that because of high net migration or of emigration in this case, firms that somehow exploit workers, making them work much more than country level average, when they face with low labor shortages, they need to relax their requirements and the number of working hours they are asking their employers to work. And of course, if you look the impact on the West, then immigration or immigrants typically goes on those sectors that are associated with higher number of working hours, like construction or hospitality and retail. So that's why when we interact these dummy with net migration, we see that relatively they work more. It is associated with a positive impact. I mean, relatively positive impact for those working in construction, hospitality, and retail. Yeah, just to sum up everything we said, the first hypothesis was about the workplace size, and we know that more workers are associated with fewer working hours. Then we know that the female labor force participation, it is reducing working hours, and the effect is much stronger in East Europe. We know that the social benefits explain a lot of variation in the data, and the impact is similar in both East and the West, although countries in the West typically have a stronger welfare system. And net migration, it has a contradictory impact on both regions. In the West, increases working hours in some sectors, but not on overall. While in the East, net migration, which is actually emigration, below the median working hour, it increases working hours, so making people work more. Above the median, it is making people to work less. Thank you so much, and now I'm happy to take questions.
Thanks a million, Albian. That was very interesting stuff, and I think some of the results there jump out in particular. When you see. When you think about stereotypes and whatever, and somebody around my age and even from our institute might think about the austerity years and some of the narratives around productive Germans versus unproductive Greeks or whatever, and you see that average hours jumping off the page there, which I find just very interesting. I have a few questions there now, and I have them in the chat, but I'll read them out anyway. But I want to start from the last one there, actually.